Welcome, everybody. Let me introduce myself. I'm Taeki Kim, a professor of Dankook University, teaching lab economics, and I'm the chairman of the Time of System Deliberation Committee. It's my pleasure to play a role of chairman of this session on how to make qualitative jobs. As Korea has been faced with worsening employment, this topic is very timely and important. Korea has been internationally famous for almost full employment during the last decades. The indicator of unemployment rate is still good, but the trend of labor market shows serious problems. Employment does not grow as expected, even though economic growth rate rises. Wage gap between the large enterprise sector and small and medium enterprise sector is so big that labor market shows polarity problems of labor shortage as well as job shortage. Especially young labor with high education is faced with severe shortage of jobs. Baby boom generation is under hard pressure of early retirement. Female labor is less participated in labor market due to unfavorable conditions to work. And so birth rate in Korea drops to the lowest level in the world. Government has been trying to fix such problems and create jobs with various measures, but they have not been so successful. Working poor increase and income distribution has become worse. President Lee Myung-bak established so-called National Employment Strategic Committee and recently suggested so-called Fair Society, which raised consciousness of job problem issues. He urges large enterprises more cooperative with small and medium enterprises and so push job creation. He may recognize export-driven economic growth has limit to solve employment problems and the effect of manufacturing industry to promote employment decreases in globalization age. Today, we meet distinguished experts on job issues. I believe they will give us precious ideas. Let me introduce the first speaker, Jack McDonald, Senior Vice President at the U.S. Council on Competitiveness. Jack served as Deputy Undersecretary for Economic Affairs at the U.S. Department of Commerce. Today, he gives us a lecture titled as the 21st Century Manufacturing Imperative, Talent, Innovation, Collaboration, Sustainability, Prosperity. And second speaker, Professor Dr. Reinhold Weiss, Deputy President and Head of Research of Federal Institute for Vocational Education and Training. Weiss is well-known expert on vocational education theory. Today, he gives us a presentation titled as Innovation Economy to Quality Jobs Toward Sustainable Growth, the German Example. Last, I introduce Dr. Philip Brown, professor in the School of Social Science, Cardiff University. He is expert on the future of work, skills, and knowledge economy. Today he gives us a lecture titled as Globalization, Cooperative Strategies, and the Future of the Work. Now we begin with Mr. Jack Douglas' presentation. If we have time after 3 presentations, you may ask questions to the speakers. Thank you. Jack, yeah, you first.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Kim, for that warm introduction. It's a pleasure to be here in Korea to talk about such a critical issue as developing intellectual capital and human talent. It's kind of bright up here, so I can't see if anybody's going to fall asleep during my presentation. I know it's been a long day, and your heads are probably full of a lot of information, and the last thing you want is something else to remember to take home with you. But hopefully we can raise a few provocative issues and questions and things to think about as we deal with some of these issues. I'm going to talk a little bit about manufacturing, and manufacturing in the United States is enjoying a resurgence, maybe not so much on the production side, but certainly on the conversational side and the political side. But before we get into that, sometimes I think it's useful to take a longer-term view, which is something I know many of our colleagues in Asia do a much better job of that than we do in the United States because we're so focused on short-term profits and meeting quarterly targets. But let's think back to the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, the mechanized era in the 18th and 19th centuries, when we transitioned from human and animal labor inputs to machinery, although there are still some areas in the world that rely on human and animal labor. This was a dramatic change in the human condition. We began to see specialization, division of labor. We started to move from an agrarian economy to an industrialized economy. We started to use power systems, coal and steam, which allowed us to increase our productivity. We standardized parts, materials. We started to mass produce products. Consumers began to purchase in mass quantities. And then a very important milestone was all metal machine tools that allowed replication in different areas around the world, at that point mostly in Europe and North America. And we get into the earliest 20th century. What's really interesting about this too is there are some estimates that show that until this point in time, average GDP per capita across the world was about zero. And at this point, it increased roughly tenfold. It was the first significant increase in global GDP per capita that we have seen. Today it stands at about $14,000, which is pretty remarkable given some of the disparities that we see across different economies. In the earliest 20th century, as you recall, electricity and the internal combustion engine changed everything. There were those at the time that thought the internal combustion engine was just a fad and that it would never replace the horse as a means of transportation or labor. They were slightly off on their predictions. We saw a transition of technological leadership from Britain, where a lot of this started, to the United States and Germany, and as we witness today, across the entire globe. Work practices and processes were modernized, scientific management. We had mass production and assembly lines. Everybody recalls Henry Ford. You can have any color you want as long as it's black, but they were cranking out a lot of cars in a short amount of time, and people started to buy them. It changed everything. Development of steel, chemical, petroleum, electrical, and automotive industries, and emerging giant global corporations, U.S. Steel, Texaco, Daimler, General Electric, Bayer, and so many others that are still familiar to us today. So globalization, moving into the 21st century, an awful lot's been happening over the past 30 years, and I use 30 years as a specific milestone because it was 30 years ago in 1980 that we began to see rise to Silicon Valley. And everything in our world has changed since then. It's interesting to think about the rise of Silicon Valley. In the year 1980, it was estimated that U.S. GDP in 2010 would be approximately $4 trillion, whereas today it stands at about $14 trillion. Much of that additional growth can be attributed to the technology industries that were born in Silicon Valley. And globally, it's estimated that the birth of Silicon Valley has created in excess of $100 trillion in additional growth. That's very significant. The lesson of that is that if you recognize a Silicon Valley starting to grow in your economies, just get out of the way and see where it will take you. So as we move into the 21st century, the potential for human capital really takes off. We have new, powerful global economies, witnessed right here in Korea. We have global distribution and supply networks, innovation and inventive technologies like we've never seen before, nanotech, biotech, agriculture, materials, computers, software, and it goes on and on. One of our member companies, Nanomech, they've developed a nano-based technology when added to lubricants, improves the viscosity by 30%. We have estimates that if we were to add that particular nano lubricant enhancer, that it would create more than $1 trillion in additional value in the United States alone. So the potential for new breakthroughs is really incredible, and a lot of that is going to become reality because of human capital. Communications with satellites, fiber optic networks, the internet, automation and robotics, even at the nano level. So, given all that, the reality of today's challenges are that it's really tough out there. Manufacturing, U.S. manufacturing in particular, faces intense global competition. But we're convinced that economic growth and creating new jobs critically depends on innovative and agile manufacturing capabilities. For a number of years in the United States, we thought we could be a services economy. I think people are starting to realize that that's not true, that you need to have a vibrant manufacturing core sector in order to build the rest of your economy around. And as I'll get into in a few minutes, around innovation and advanced skills for your workforce, if you're not making anything, you're likely not learning anything. Manufacturing has a greater multiplier effect than any other sector of the economy. In fact, in the United States, for every $1 in manufacturing output translates into about $1.50 in output of other sectors. That's the highest. The next highest is information technology, which is at about $1. But when you get to retail, wholesale, and even financial services, they all range between 50 and 65 cents. So their value added isn't nearly the same as it is in manufacturing. Manufacturing jobs, those direct jobs on the assembly line or in the plants, also are responsible for 5 other jobs in the economy. So when we talk about job growth in the future, it may not be directly product manufacturing based, but the jobs that support those jobs. We have competition for talent, resources, and innovation, emerging business models. It's interesting, right now in the United States, manufacturing output accounts for about 19% of world totals. We do that with 11 million workers. China, who is closely catching up to us, is responsible for roughly about 18% of global output. They do that with between 70 and 100 million workers. So when we talk about China, yes, China's growth has been significant and it's been very fascinating and fast to watch, but there are very significant dynamics and differences between the manufacturing models that are being deployed. The United States will never again compete on commodity prices, nor should we, or commodity products, nor should we, but rather we need to compete on high value added, high intellectual capital input products that create greater margins and allow us to take market share in different economies around the world. So when we talk about the global manufacturing ecosystem, I think about the 20th century as being very mechanical and the 21st century being very organic. And it's going to have a lot of implications for our policymakers, our public institutions, as well as a lot of our bilateral and multilateral relationships. We're talking about cutting-edge science and technology, really rapid innovation, high-performance computing, highly talented workers, sustainable design, systems engineering, supply chain excellence, smart services, a whole movement towards low-carbon manufacturing, and the list goes on and on and on about what we may and may not see in the 21st century. So as much as we like to sometimes predict, I think the one thing that we can predict is the future will be volatile, uncertain, and full of peril as well as opportunities. And it's the people involved that are going to take advantage of those opportunities. But we need to make sure we have the right people in place. In order to understand manufacturing competitiveness a little better, in collaboration with Deloitte Consulting, the Council conducted a global manufacturing competitiveness survey. We surveyed more than 400 manufacturing CEOs around the world to find out where they thought the most competitiveness manufacturing economies were. In 2010, it was China, India, the Republic of Korea, which will come as no surprise to many of you here, the United States, and then Brazil, number 5. These same executives saw Brazil moving up to number 4 and the United States moving to number 5 in the year 2015, and the others remaining the same. So the dynamics of the competitive marketplace are changing rapidly, but again, you have to look through the numbers to understand them. But clearly China is viewed as very competitive. What was most interesting about our survey and index, when we looked at the specific drivers of what constitutes manufacturing competitiveness, and what we'll talk about a little bit today, is talent-driven innovation. Without question, that far outstrips cost of labor and materials. energy costs, suppliers, business dynamics, economic trade, financial and tax systems, quality of physical infrastructure, government investments in manufacturing, legal and regulatory systems, as well as health care. It led by a significant margin over all the others, and so it's quite clear that manufacturing CEOs across the world see talent-driven innovation as the key driver to their abilities to produce in the future. And think about it, manufacturing is very knowledge intensive, particularly today, much more so than it's ever been. Workforce skills, capabilities, experience, and knowledge, that's all contained within your workforce. Managerial excellence, one advantage that the United States has oftentimes is its managerial systems. Product development, engineering, design, R&D, those are now spreading across the world. Computerized information, software, and databases speed up everything, particularly around the innovation process. Business models, organizational structures, brand equity, reputation, all of these intangible assets are what drives manufacturing productivity and knowledge in the future. And all of these are contained within the workforce. So the manufacturing worker of the future, particularly in the United States, is not wearing a hard hat and blue jeans, but rather they're wearing a white smock and safety goggles, and they're working in a clean room. So one of the things that's happening internationally around the globe is the expansion of higher education. At one point, for higher education, a lot of students would come to the United States. That's still the case, but there are institutions of higher learning springing up around the world today that offer a very competitive environment in which to gain the skills needed to compete and succeed in the global economy. Enrollment's doubled since 1990. It now exceeds 150 million people worldwide. That's incredible, the number of folks that are getting a higher education. At one point, the U.S. was home to 20% of the university-enrolled students, but now we have less than 13%. And China's share has more than doubled, reaching 15%, making it the largest source of new university graduates in the world. Of course, we always have to look behind the numbers because none of these reflect quality, but again, there is obviously a growing desire for higher education across the globe. But in particular, it's those critical skilled workers that we need for manufacturing. Science and engineering, we're seeing a lot of that shift more towards Asia and away from the United States. As I mentioned here, that science and engineering degrees represent nearly 40% of all university degrees in China and Korea compared to just 15% in the United States. And so what's driving some of that? In addition to global R&D investment expansion in the United States, it continues to grow. And as you can see, the Asia 3, which Japan, China, and Korea, are gaining close to the United States. But the United States is still spending an awful lot on R&D. And so it's the combination of R&D and talent that gives you an innovative edge in creating value. But an interesting thing that we've learned recently about manufacturing is because manufacturing has been so maligned in the United States over a number of years that although a lot of folks believe that it's important for our economic prosperity, 78%, 76% for our standard of living, and 65% show how critical it is to national security, Americans also don't believe there's a future for manufacturing in the United States because oftentimes the perception of manufacturing is just that it's dumb, dirty, and dangerous, and that's no longer the case in most instances. So when you look at respondents, if they were to begin their career today, manufacturing falls to number 6 behind several others. But it's really interesting when you look at the respondents with regard to education. You know, I would encourage my child to pursue a career in manufacturing, only 30%. But it's striking that only 18% of students in this poll indicated that their parents even talked with them about manufacturing careers. And again, if you're not making anything, you're not learning anything. So you can't just do the design and engineering and then expect somebody else to make these things because you lose a lot of your advantages. So the way that we're looking at this right now is we're looking at the U.S. innovation and production cycle. In the United States, it's linear. These would be some lessons learned for folks that are thinking about the innovation process. We spend a lot of time talking about and investing in basic R&D, applied R&D, and then we talk about tech transfer and early stage commercialization. So we have innovation clusters, we have a lot of government support for this, we have loans, we have direct grants, we have national laboratories focused on both basic and applied R&D. But then all of a sudden that whole process hits a wall, and that wall is called late-stage commercialization. It's startup production, it's production at scale, and then it's after sales, service, and installation. We're doing a research project right now that indicates that once a U.S. developed technology in production generates about $150 million in revenues, it becomes cost prohibitive to continue to produce in the United States in order to maintain your global margins. So companies are looking for alternative locations. And so as a result of that, we're not capturing the full benefits of those developed technologies. Rather, we're losing the skill sets required to make those. We're losing the innovation gateways that as you're producing something, you get better at producing it constantly over time. And so we need to focus on the production process and the production cycle. And so we're looking at it as a more cyclical feedback loop, if you will, where you take the applied R&D, tech transfer, and startup production, but you embed production at scale within that process, sales, installation, and service as well, and then you include these in the entire innovation process. And as a result, there'll be a direct correlation with your workforce development, maintaining the skills that you need in order to continue to manufacture in advanced areas, particularly as we start looking at biotechnology and nanotechnology, and that this becomes more of a self-fulfilling feedback loop, that you're not losing a lot of the advantages that you would gain otherwise. And so we're working right now to move the United States from the concept of innovation clusters to manufacturing ecosystems, which is a very different concept, and seeing how we can spread funding across a broader range of the innovation process, not just the upfront or startup piece. So in closing, what we need is a really positive policy engagement and a really positive conversation about these issues. And we need to look at the entire system. We tend to look at pieces of the system, and we need to look at the entire system. We need to improve communication and trust amongst governments, regulators, industry, and education. We need to focus on workforce issues, particularly work skills and needs-based and system-based education models. In the United States, for so many years, it's been liberal arts, 4-year college degree. We need to create parity with vocational degrees and skills in order to encourage more folks to go there. And quite frankly, these days in the United States, an independent plumber probably makes about $500,000 a year versus a lot of college graduates that are making $100,000 or $120,000. We need to focus on global imbalances and monetary policies because we are going to need the financial resources to fund these things. We need permanent tax policies to encourage research and development as well as production. And we need to realize how important that supranational adaptive needs-based infrastructure is going to become so that we can deal with IPR issues, trade, climate issues, health and safety issues, food and water issues, and a number of other critical issues that we will be facing in the years to come. So with that, I want to thank you very much, and hopefully I didn't exceed my time and put too many people to sleep. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jack. You made us have a quite comprehensive view and insight on the future of manufacturing. Thank you so much. Next speaker, the Professor Reinhold Weiss.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's a great honor for me to be here and contribute to this important conference. I would like to talk to you about some challenges the German vocational education training system is facing. I have structured my presentation by 3 theses. And the first one deals with the demographic development. It shows the importance of demographic development for the future, the economic situation, the social development in Germany. And we have to face with a very severe declining in the workforce. And innovation, therefore, has to be realized by an aging society. It's quite similar to a lot of other countries, but it's quite dramatic in Germany. As you can see from this chart, it's a prediction up to 2060, and the number of the population will decrease from about 82 million actually to 65 million in 2060. And at the same time, the age structure will completely different. The percentage of older people, people which have been retired, will dramatically increase. And this has consequences for the demands, for example, for schools and universities, demands for homes, for pensioners, for health services, for older people. And it also would have impact on the economic growth, on taxation and the social security system. And of course, the ability of companies and society to realize innovation processes. And the consequences are quite clear for the labor market. We have made estimations, we have developed predictions for the future, and the result of different assumptions is that beginning in about 10 years, there will be a severe shortage of labor, especially in technical professions and engineers. We also will have a severe shortage in the health sector to deliver health services for the population, especially elder people. And we also will have severe shortages in ordinary jobs, of course, for example, for professions in hotels, restaurants, and the cleaning sector. As you can show, we have also sectors, occupational fields, where the demand will come up to the supply. These are the more or less traditional sectors, for example, processing, manufacturing, and repair occupations, or occupations involving the trading and sales of goods. But we have a severe shortage of labor in other fields, as you can see down on the chart. For example, in the health sector, in social occupations, artistic, media, humanities, and social sciences. How to deal with this situation? First of all, we have to consider that we have unused potentials in Germany on the labor market. For example, about 7% of the school leavers don't have the minimum qualification. So one central aim is to reduce this percentage. Another point is we have about 70% of the age group between 20 and 29 without a generally accepted vocational qualification. This is fairly low, corresponds to other countries, but we have the aim to reduce this number dramatically. We also have about 3 million people unemployed at the moment. We came from 5 million people unemployed, and now we only have about 3 million. So we were quite successful, even through the economic crisis during the last years. And about 60% of these 3 million unemployed people have a vocational qualification, so they have a fairly good basis to enter the labor market. And from traditional reasons, the female employment in Germany is traditionally low, especially in the older age group from 50 to 65. So we have to develop services for young families, so that women, young women, which are very well educated, better educated than older age groups before, can return to the workplace and offer their services. And of course we have developed potentials in the older age group, the age group between 55 and 65, because the average age of retirement is about 62 at the moment. The legal age to enter the retirement system is about 65, in a few years will be 67. So we have potentials which could be used. So if we use these potentials, we can say during the next 10 to 15 years, the reduction, the demographic reduction in the workforce could be compensated, but only if you refer on the quantities, not when you refer on the professions and the quality side of the people. So we have to invest in general education and vocational education training to keep these people to the labor market, to upgrade their qualification. And upgrading qualification is necessary to enter the pathway to a knowledge society. That's my second thesis. And this is a figure showing the qualification structure in Germany and the future development of this qualification structure. And you can see that there is a process, we expect, process of upgrading skills, an increasing number of employees with university degrees and advanced vocational qualification. That is a qualification, for example, as Meister or technician. This is a qualification on an upper level than the level of the dual system of vocational education training. And we expect a decrease in the number of unemployed people. What does it mean for special professions? We expect a tremendous lack in what we call in Germany MINT qualification, what in other countries is called STEM qualification, qualification in sciences, technology, engineers, mathematics. We have an increasing lack, we expect an increasing lack with engineers, and we are thinking about strategies to motivate youngsters to learn subjects like chemistry, mathematics, or technology. And we try to make the systems more permeability, to strengthen the permeability between the vocational education and training and the university sector, to motivate employees with ordinary or advanced vocational education and training to move to the universities and to make a university degree as engineer. But of course, finally, we need immigration. We have lots of foreign students studying technology in Germany, but at the moment they are forced to leave the country when they have their final examination. It's due to our demographic situation ridiculous, and I think this situation will be changed in a few months, and this regulation will be more liberalized than it is until now. Experts from the labor market are wondering why Germany has such low rates of academics. The percentage of academic degrees in the workforce is about 23% actually, very slow increasing, of course, but this is far away from the rates in other countries. And many experts wonder why it could be, why Germany could be so successful in the past in innovation processes and economic growth. And the answer is that many jobs which are done by academics or employees with academic background in other countries are done in Germany by employees with vocational qualification. And they are even integrated to innovation processes. And important is that German workers are able to talk with technicians and even engineers, and they can build groups to innovate products and processes. They understand each other because they speak the same technical language. And of course, many jobs which are done in other countries by academics are done by people with an advanced vocational education and training. When you look to the ISCET classification, there we have the ISCET classification 5A with scientific degrees and 5B with degrees in advanced vocational education and training. And in Germany we have actually about 240,000 graduates with ISCET level A from universities or universities of applied sciences. And we have about half of this sum coming from the vocational education and training system. And finally, both groups, both graduates, are working in the same jobs. They have nearly the same job profiles, as you can see from this chart. So this is a reason why the academic rate in Germany from traditional reasons was so low. We think in Germany that the dual system is the basis for economic success and the basis also for innovation. It's responsible for the relatively low rate of youth unemployment, and in Germany the best way to get a secure and well-paid job, and you also get acceptance within the society. But of course the dual system as well has to be changed, has to be adopted to the requirements of a knowledge society. We are still going on in this process because the dual system of vocational education and training is based on training regulations for companies and curricula for vocational schools, and innovation has already been implemented to the training regulations of the companies. We have about 349 generally accepted professions with training regulations for the companies. And between 1998 and 2009, already 200 professions have partially been renewed, and 64 professions have been developed completely new. And most of the professions actually are offered in the service sector. So the dual system is no more concentrated on industry or the craft sector, but very well integrated in the trade, in banking system, in catering trade, in healthcare or IT. But there's one concern about the dual system, and this has to do with the development of knowledge-intensive jobs. As you can see from this chart, we have done a study for the federal government, counting and analyzing the tasks of the workforce. And of course, the most important jobs for the knowledge society are knowledge-intensive jobs, and they are done mostly by graduates with academic qualification, not with those with formal vocational qualification. And of course, this is a typical qualification for academics, but also the percentage of those who are in knowledge-intensive jobs active could be increased within the dual system. And we are working on this. And we are working on this to make the dual system more attractive also in the future. And the companies have to deal with the situation that they have a smaller number of school leavers to recruit apprentices for dual apprenticeship training. And they have to offer training for those with low qualification profiles, and therefore they need additional help to engage, to offer training for even handicapped people. And on the other hand, they have to care for those who are high potentials. And the dual system must also be attractive for the high potentials, as it was until now. So the companies have to invest more to dual training, for example, by offering additional certified vocational training courses within the dual apprenticeship training, or also additional courses to achieve a general qualification or even a double qualification. Maybe the examination within dual profession and at the same time a university entrance examination. And to make apprenticeship training attractive, companies are cooperating with universities and universities of applied science to integrate apprenticeship training to studies. We have a lot of models about these kind of integration. This is idealistic type of model. First of all, we have the final examination of an apprenticeship training, classical apprenticeship training. An option could be, as a second degree, to be integrated to this qualification, the examination, advanced vocational education and training, for example, as Meister or technician. And third, after 4 years, the apprentices, students can achieve a bachelor or even a master degree. And we have about 700 models of integrated training and studies at the moment, with about 80,000 students. This is comparing to 1.5 million apprentices, a fairly low number, but it's still increasing, and it will increase and will be secure that the dual system will be attractive for those who have better formal qualification. And necessary in the political processes that the advanced vocational education is equal to university degrees. We are just developing in Germany a qualification framework, a German qualification framework, which is compatible to the European qualification framework. The German framework has actually, the draft has 8 levels, with bachelor on level 6 and master degree on level 7. And we are discussing about putting the vocational degrees into this 8 levels. And this is one suggestion from experts from the vocational field, so that the advanced levels of vocational training should be on level 6 or even level 7, that is the master or bachelor level, and the ordinary vocational training the 3-year vocational training should be on level 4. We are in intensive discussion in Germany, especially with the universities, but I'm quite optimistic that finally the advanced vocational degrees will be ranked on this level. Finally, to fulfill the requirements of the future development and also to deal with the reducing number of workforce, we need more vocational training during the work life. And this is a problem in Germany because we have relatively low intensity of continuing vocational training. The German intensity to different studies in Europe is much lower than the intensity, for example, in Sweden, Denmark, or even the United Kingdom. We have to do a lot, have more investments, especially of companies, to get a better position, because this is very crucial to fulfill the requirements of knowledge society and to deal with the situation of an aging workforce. Thank you very much. I hope I'm just in time.
Thank you, Vice. It's so impressive, the dual system of in Germany for vocational education training is under progress. The last speaker, Philip. So you waited a long time. You got about 20 minutes, I'm sorry.
I've been waiting all day. This is my 4th visit to Seoul, and it's a great honor, obviously, to be here again and to participate in this conference. It may be worth, given it is the end of the day, to return to the theme of the open and ready for tomorrow, because I think we'd like to argue that in many respects the Western economies, at least, are not really ready for tomorrow because they don't fully understand some of the changes taking place today. So what I'd like to do fairly briefly is really to talk about some research which challenges, I think, the fundamental model that's been operating around the global knowledge economy. This assumes, if you like, a quality job guarantee, at least for Western countries such as Britain, America, and Germany and elsewhere. And it begins with a view of technology, that technology will drive the demand for skill, and this will lead to good quality jobs for most of the population, certainly those who get a good education. If you like, we've heard a lot about the age of human capital. But what really matters now is that divide that you get through skill. Now, to some extent, that is certainly true. But we want to argue that this idea needs to be qualified in several respects, as does ideas around globalization. Because there's been an assumption in the West that globalization has been a win-win, and especially a win-win for Western economies. Because the view has been that the West would do the world's thinking. And, if you like, that's the head work, and the body work would be done elsewhere in places like China, Vietnam, India, and in a sense we can carry on competing on quality rather than cost. Just to give you a sense of this sort of view of globalization and the head-body nations. If you look at Rosecrans here, just the end bit of this, so globalization was now about economic competition rather than military conflict, and that there'd be a new partnership between those nations that do the designing and the thinking and those that do the manufacturing. If we think in these terms, then the policy implications are fairly clear. What we need to do is to create, if you like, a magnet for high-skilled work so that we can create those jobs which will create that social justice, that will narrow those income divides that we've seen in America and Britain and elsewhere. That we do this through expanding higher education, that we do this through raising the standards within our schools and within our colleges and our universities. And we do this obviously through innovation and R&D, which we've heard a great deal about. And we would support most of the views that have been presented about the importance of innovation and R&D. But nevertheless, we still think a lot of it may be overstated. Also, there is a view about the importance of foreign talent, a war for talent that's been developed around the world. I mean, America has long used foreign talent to drive its economy in many respects, and this has been copied elsewhere in Canada and the UK, and we're hearing, I think, in Germany as well. So the basic assumption then, if you like, to capture this idea of the age of human capital is learning equals earning. So we've encouraged people to go into higher education, and the assumption that what they invest in terms of that education will deliver in terms of jobs and in terms of income. Our punchline is that, unlike Thomas Friedman, we do not see the world as flat. We see the world as profoundly uneven, as segmented, leading to an increasing unraveling, if you like, in the relationship between education, jobs, and rewards. So human capital assumes a tightening bond between these things, and what we're arguing is actually that may not be the case. That for some, it will continue to deliver high returns, but for many others, with a good education, it will not. So in a sense, what we have is a global auction. But it's a global auction which is a dual auction. For some, it will continue to be a progressive auction, a bit like Sotheby's. The value, the bidding goes upwards. And we all like to think of ourselves and our skills and our knowledge as being in that kind of a bidding war, where people want to pay more for what we produce and what we know. However, for many others, they're increasingly getting locked into a reverse auction, where the bidding doesn't go up, but actually goes down, and the price of knowledge, for some, is actually declining. This presents a challenge and opportunity, of course, for all the developed and emerging economies in trying to bring together justice and prosperity. And it's that really which is driving our analysis. What we're arguing here is based upon a number of years of research and interviews with senior executives and managers in around 30 multinational companies across 7 countries, including Korea, including China, India, Germany, the US and the UK. And we've also talked to policymakers in those countries as well to get their sense of globalization and what it means for them, and whether they see the world as it's been presented or portrayed as this combination between head nations and body nations. We also focused on 3 sectors, and I can explain to anybody afterwards why we chose these 3. But we focused on automotive, financial services, and ITC/telecoms. We're interested particularly in the mobile phone and the globalization of the production of mobile phones and research and development. What we can argue is that what we've discovered from lots of travel around these countries is that there are 4 key trends that we think are shaping this relationship between education, jobs and rewards in many respects. The first of these was mentioned by Jack, and it is, of course, the expansion of higher education, if you like, the globalization of high skills. The relationship between skills and education, of course, is a problematic one, but bear with me in using the idea of high skills here in this kind of way. And what our analysis has shown that, like Jack's, that there's been a doubling of the number of enrollments within higher education globally. Our figure is a little bit lower than his, but we focused on about 134 countries, so they're pretty close, actually. We also see how China has overtaken the US in terms of enrollments by about the year 2006, with around 20 million, and currently has around 27 million. But one of the things that we need to also take account of here is that China has just launched a new talent initiative, which some of you will be familiar with. This will see another 100 million people going through higher education in China over the next 10 years. That's 10 million people entering the labour market each year for the next 10 years. That is an unbelievable experiment, which could actually backfire. But nevertheless, this gives you a sense of the scale at which some nations are now investing in higher education. And we also know that, as again in the earlier presentation, that in the areas of engineering and science, that the Asian economies certainly have the lead in many ways, and certainly in terms of education and doctorates, where 60% of engineering doctorates were awarded to foreign students, many of them from China and the rest of Asia, in both America and the UK. So if you like, the assumed barrier to competition to the middle classes in the West, based upon human capital, is increasingly suspect. In a sense, that might be a problem, or it might not be. But when it's combined with the second trend, it looks more problematic. Because the assumption has been that we compete on quality or cost, and that the West would compete on quality, and that there are barriers to quality in other parts of the world. And what we've seen in just the space of a decade is the very, very rapid way in which China, India and elsewhere have been able to lift the quality standards to meet global benchmarks, and has enabled them to enter the competition for high skills as well as low skills, for research, for design forms of work, as well as low-level manufacturing and call center forms of activity, which to us was unbelievably surprising, just the pace of this. In financial services, virtually none of this was possible around 2000 until software developed, which allowed companies to be able to operate following the sun. So, for example, with pitch book work, which is the work that's undertaken, the research that goes behind a bid to a customer, that work is more and more being conducted in India rather than in New York, London or Frankfurt. But alongside this quality cost revolution is something else which is problematic, I think, for us. And that is that we've tended to assume that there's a close relationship between, if you like, social development and economic development, between prosperity and between justice, that they would be linked together. And in one of our interviews, somebody just talked about their company as having an inside-out model. And this, to us, caught something quite profound, that it was the idea that this connection between the social and the economic is increasingly fragmenting. In other words, the pre-industrial and the post-industrial can increasingly share the same postcode. And that poses major problems in terms of social justice. The one thing I would say, if you're doing any kind of research like this, take a camera. We didn't do this for many years, so we don't have the quality pictures we should have. But this gives you a sense, at least, of that inside-out perspective. The glitter of the new financial buildings going up behind for multinational companies, next to the shacks surrounding it. But of course this is also spatial, because this picture I took just a month ago, and it basically was almost in sight of Singapore. It was in Indonesia. And so the inside out is obviously a spatial one as well as a social one. Of course, this is part of a low-carbon economy, perhaps. But this inside-out model, we think is very important for also understanding that fragmentary process that we would like to highlight here. So if you like, the barriers to skill might be problematic, the barriers to quality might be problematic, but alongside this is another fundamental trend that we've identified. And that is, at the beginning of the 20th century, we saw the rise, if you like, of mechanical Taylorism. The Fordist production line captures this very well. The capturing of craft knowledge in the hands of management, redefined in terms of the production line. And the question for us today, and the thing that really intrigues Hugh Lauder and myself, is really, to what extent are we now seeing the rise of digital Taylorism? The extent to which service forms of jobs are being subjected to the same kind of capture process that craft work was in the early 20th century. In other words, the aspects of working knowledge, of knowledge work, are being captured as working knowledge in software packages. Now this makes very good sense for companies. When you think about it, of course, they want control and they want profitability. If the knowledge is left in the heads of their workers, who are able to go off somewhere else very easily, they are losing that control. If they are globalizing, they need to align their businesses across national boundaries. Well, how do you do this? You do this actually through the development of increasingly modular-based forms of organization. We spoke to one bank who argued that their lift and shift attempts failed dismally because actually you can't just take a bit of a process. What you have to do is you have to understand how the business operates in its totality. And if you simplify the company in its totality, then you can begin to define it. And when you can begin to define it and the operations within it, then you can begin to standardize. And when you begin to standardize, you can begin to build software which will allow you to capture some of that knowledge. It allows you to decide where you have permission to think, who will have that permission, and what else can be done either through technology or, crucially, in terms of making the decisions about where to produce, in terms of where there is a cost advantage. So very briefly, we can therefore suggest that there may be three kinds of knowledge workers emerging. The first are the developers. These are the creative workforce. These are the ones we often talk about when we talk about the knowledge worker and the knowledge economy and the role of leading universities. But there are also very large numbers of well-qualified graduates who are in, if you like, demonstrator roles. And this in the future will be related to consultancy. Teaching is another area, obviously, where it can take place, where a lot of the knowledge is captured and pre-programmed. And of course you might need good social skills in presenting to a client, but nevertheless that knowledge in many respects is controlled by the company and not by the individual. And then of course you have the routine digitalization of work, call centers being the obvious example there. The final one is the war for talent. There's loads of discussion about talent, and what we would say, however, is one, it's amazing to us that we've seen this massive expansion of higher education, this doubling of global enrollments, and yet when you talk to corporate bosses, they all say they're in a war for talent. And that raises a question for us. That is, how then is talent being defined? How is talent being used? And this seems to us to be an open question. The idea is simply that you need great people. May be true to some extent in some limited areas. But it's also being used as a way of segmenting knowledge work because basically a lot of organisations are taking large numbers of graduates with, if you like, expert knowledge that they've learnt while at university. How do we legitimate the inequalities in terms of what people do within those companies and what people receive within those companies? The notions of talent and the notions of performance are therefore part and parcel of that broader, if you like, positional division of labour within modern organisations, which we should not be ignoring. It should be part of our analysis. Okay, so when you put these four trends together, what we see is the creation of, if you like, global skill webs. That companies increasingly can make decisions which are strategic about what to do where and in which kind of way. So in a sense, companies are increasingly disembedded from national contexts. And the more they're disembedded and the more they can develop global webs, then the more HR matters. And what we would say is HR matters to companies now more than perhaps ever before, but not for the reasons we've tended to assume in the past. And this then leads us to our conclusions. The creative job of job creation, which is that what we can conclude is that the demand for skill, the demand for high skill from companies has never been greater, globally. But that at the same time presents huge problems at the national level. And it presents huge problems for countries in different kinds of ways, crucially because there are different kinds of political expectations at the individual and family level, as well as at the corporate level and also at the national political level, that need to be taken into account. We've seen, on the very positive side, very rapid innovations, we've mentioned, in some emerging economies. And at the same time, we have today record youth unemployment globally. It's higher than at any time since they started trying to measure youth unemployment. So there's a mismatch here. There are problems about that relationship, as we said, between prosperity and justice that we need to pay more attention to. In the West, the major problem is there simply are not enough quality jobs. There are not enough jobs per se, increasingly in places like Britain, given the austerity measures that have been introduced. But it's also the quality of those jobs. And this isn't just about what people do in those jobs. It's also about that relationship between what people do and what people get in terms of the rewards, in terms of pensions, in terms of career prospects. This itself is becoming more fragmented as well. And if we're looking at HR issues, then surely this is something we need to also explore more thoroughly. There is therefore a crisis in many respects of expectation. That we've warmed people up to the idea that they'll invest in their human capital and there'll be a return for them at the end which will be commensurate to that investment. What we've seen in places like Britain and America also is much more emphasis upon simply making a living, making money. If you think about it, human capital is not about doing a good job. Human capital is about getting the maximum return for your investment. And there's something problematic about that. There's something problematic about the way we think about work if we see it just in terms, for example, of customers. Because another way of thinking about this, of course, is thinking about work as doing things for other people, as contributing towards a society more generally. And that seems to get lost in much of this discussion. And what Hugh Lauder and myself would want to argue is that that human capital theory in many ways has met the laws of diminishing returns. That it works very well in a context where there aren't many middle-class jobs, where there are relatively few people in higher education. But when you have a mass system of higher education, and when you have already 40% of the workforce in technical, managerial and professional kinds of jobs, then you hit major problems in terms of that human capital model, irrespective of the global issues that we've raised. Of course, we're not saying that expansion of higher education is not important. We're not saying that higher education is not crucial in terms of innovation and in building competitive advantage. We need to think about new ways of embedding that advantage, which Germany seems to be managing, at least up to now, although it's likely to confront further competition in the future. And also, I think, if we are going to create the kind of creative talent that we need at the top end, then somehow we have to do something about the high-stakes competition. It's high stakes in Britain, it's high stakes in America. It is incredibly high stakes in Korea. If children are schooled from first thing in the morning to late at night, if they are schooled for simply a test to see who gets into a university, a positional competition, then how can we expect them to then be creative and to think in new, innovative ways? It is virtually impossible to achieve. So we need some pretty fundamental changes in the way in which we organise the educational system if we really are serious about improving the creativity of talent at all levels, let alone just top talent. And do we also need then a democratisation of the notion of talent? Should we just refer to that top 10%, 15%, or should this be cascading down the occupational structure, down the educational system, in ways which would be much more democratic? In short, what we need to do is to find new ways of reconnecting prosperity and social justice, because our current thinking, certainly in the Western economies, about education, jobs and rewards is increasingly failing. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Well, I believe our audience shares your position. Making good jobs begins with learning. Today, we had quite international comparison of human resource development. Thanks everybody for your deep interest and attention to our presentation. I think that we believe human resource development is the key to the prosperity of people and nation. Thank you so much.